She was near death, and a human stepped in when no one else could. The planet Velker was dying. Once a thriving world filled with cities of glass and metal that reflected the light of distant stars, it was now a shadow of itself. The atmosphere was thick with an unnatural haze, a byproduct of a deadly virus that had swept through the population, claiming the lives of millions. The disease showed no mercy. Those infected showed symptoms within hours, and within days, they were reduced to nothing more than empty husks. Zyra was one of the few survivors, but she wasn't just any survivor. She was the last hope of her people. As one of the leaders of the Velker, her survival meant more than just the continuation of her own life. It represented the possibility of rebuilding, of finding a cure, and of saving her race from the brink of extinction. But the virus had ravaged her body, and she knew that time was running out. Zyra lay in a small, sterile room at the Velker research outpost, her breathing shallow and labored. The once proud alien species was now reduced to desperation, and Zyra was no exception. Her skin, once a rich shade of violet, had turned pale, and her long, elegant limbs trembled with weakness. She could feel the virus coursing through her, eating away at her strength with every passing minute. Her mind was foggy, her thoughts scattered, but she clung to one thing, the hope that someone somewhere might be able to help. But as each minute passed, that hope seemed to fade. The research station was a ghost of its former self. The advanced medical equipment that had once been able to cure even the most complex illnesses was now useless. The Velker's greatest minds had tried everything they could, but nothing had worked. The virus was too powerful, and so Zyra waited. She waited for the inevitable, for the death that was creeping ever closer. Outside the room, the rest of the Velker scientists were in the midst of a heated discussion. They were all aware of how dire the situation had become. One by one, they had lost family, friends, and colleagues to the virus. Now, with Zyra on the brink of death, their last hope was slipping away. No one knew what to do. The best minds of the Velker had come together, but they had no answers. Zyra could hear their voices drifting in through the door, their words muffled by the thick metal walls. She closed her eyes, willing herself to ignore the sound. But it was hard. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She wasn't just a leader, she was a symbol. She represented the last chance her people had to survive, and now it seemed that chance was slipping through her fingers. "Zyra," a voice called softly through the door. It was Dr. Carr, the head of the research team. She had been one of the first to diagnose the virus and had worked tirelessly to find a cure. Zyra had always admired her determination, but even Dr. Carr's resolve was beginning to waver. "I'm here," Zyra managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The door creaked open and Dr. Carr stepped inside. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. She had been working around the clock, trying every possible treatment she could think of, but none had worked. "We're out of options, Zyra, doctor," Carr said softly, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry." Zyra nodded, though she had known this moment was coming. She had seen the same hopelessness in the eyes of her people. There was nothing more to be done. The Velker would die, and with them, the future of her species would vanish. But just as the darkness threatened to overwhelm her, a new sound filled the room. It was the low hum of an engine, faint but unmistakable. Zyra's ears perked up. It was a sound she hadn't heard in months. A ship, a human ship. The Velker had long since given up on contacting other species. The virus had ravaged their communication systems, and the rest of the galaxy had moved on. The Velker were no longer a threat to anyone, and as far as the rest of the galaxy knew, they had simply faded into obscurity. Yet here it was, a human ship arriving in their system. Zyra's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could this be a sign of hope? "Doctor." Carr looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "A ship? Are you sure?" Zyra nodded weakly. "I hear it. A human ship." A flurry of activity erupted outside the room. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the station, and the murmur of voices grew louder. The research team rushed to the communications console, trying to confirm the signal. They had no way of knowing who was on board, but the arrival of a human vessel was enough to spark a glimmer of hope in their hearts. It had been years since the Velker had had any contact with humans. In fact, the last encounter had been tense, marked by a brief and uneventful meeting between a human exploratory ship and a Velker diplomatic envoy. There had been no real exchange, no lasting impact. Humans were just another species in the galaxy, nothing special. At least that's what the Velker had thought. Now it seemed that was about to change. The communications officer, a young Velker named Rael, quickly established a connection with the human ship. The face that appeared on the screen was not what Zyra had expected. It was a man, human in appearance, but there was something in his expression that set him apart from others she had seen in the brief moments of contact with humans. His eyes were calm, but there was a sense of determination in them that resonated with her. "This is Captain James Callahan of the ship Resolute," the man said, his voice clear and strong. "We've come to offer assistance. We detected a distress signal coming from your station." "Are you in need of help?" Zyra could feel her heart race. The humans had come for them. They had heard their call. There was a possibility, just a sliver of a chance, that she might survive, and in turn, so might her people. We are," Zyra managed to say, her voice breaking. "We need help. Our people are dying." Captain Callahan's expression softened, but there was no mistaking the resolve in his eyes. "We'll do everything we can." With those words, hope flickered once more. The Velker might have been on the brink of extinction, but in that moment, a human captain had made a promise that had the potential to change everything. Zyra closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe, for the first time in weeks, that survival was possible. Captain James Callahan stood at the helm of the Resolute, his gaze fixed on the distant planet of Velker. The communication link was still open, the image of Zyra's pale, weakened face lingering in his mind. There was something about her, a vulnerability in her eyes that struck him deeply. She was the last hope of her people, and the virus that had ravaged her world had reduced her to a shadow of the strong leader she once was. He couldn't ignore the weight of the responsibility that had fallen upon him and his crew. He had seen countless signs of alien life throughout his career as captain, but this was different. This wasn't just another first contact. This was a rescue mission. His ship, the Resolute, was a state-of-the-art vessel, built for exploration and defense. It wasn't designed for medical emergencies, but Callahan knew that this time his crew had to pull off the impossible. As much as he tried to push it to the back of his mind, one thought persisted. What if they couldn't save her? What if they couldn't save the Velker? Turning from the command center, Callahan made his way to the medical bay, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallways. The crew was already hard at work. The medical bay had been prepared for Zyra's arrival, sterilized, stocked with the latest human medical technology, and ready to tackle the unknown. Dr. Miranda Grant, the ship's lead physician, had assembled a team of specialists, all working on the problem that had seemed impossible from the moment the distress signal was received. When Callahan entered the medical bay, the crew's activity came to a halt. Dr. Grant, a woman in her early 30s with sharp features and an even sharper mind, looked up from the monitor she had been studying. Her face was pale, betraying the exhaustion that had taken hold of her since the moment they had set course for Velker. "Captain, Dr. Grant said, her voice steady but with a trace of weariness. "We've done all we can. We've tried every medical procedure we know, but her body is rejecting everything. The virus is too strong. We need something more, something that humans haven't even thought of in generations." Callahan nodded, taking a deep breath. "What about the serum we discussed? The one based on the ancient human medical techniques?" Dr. Grant shook her head. "It's a long shot, Captain. The records are fragmented at best. The procedure was abandoned centuries ago. We'd be attempting a revival of an old technique, one that was never fully understood. But we don't have time for perfection and we don't have any other options. We need to act fast. Callahan could see the worry in her eyes. Doctor. Grant had always been confident, always had the answers. But this time, she was as uncertain as the rest of them. The knowledge she was about to unlock had the potential to change everything, or to lead them down a path they couldn't return from. He trusted her judgment, but the stakes had never been higher. "Do it," Callahan said. "We don't have a choice." Dr. Grant gave a sharp nod and turned to her team. "Prepare the biolabs for synthesis," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We're going to need every resource available to us." The room quickly filled with the hum of machines as the medical team scrambled to follow her instructions. Callahan stood still for a moment, watching the frenzy unfold around him. It was hard to believe how quickly everything had escalated. Only a few days ago, they had been on a routine mission, surveying an uninhabited planet in a distant system. Now, they were racing against time to save an entire species from extinction. As the team worked, Callahan made his way to Zyra's side. She was lying on a medical bed, her body covered with thin, translucent sheets. Her once regal appearance had been replaced with a frail, fragile form. Her violet skin, once vibrant, had taken on a dull, grayish hue. She appeared so small, so helpless. It was hard to believe she had once been the leader of her people. Callahan stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to say. There were no words that could truly convey the gravity of the situation. He had never been one for speeches, and this wasn't a moment for one. But as he looked down at Zyra, a wave of empathy washed over him. She had no family left, no people to return to. And yet here she was, clinging to life because of the small hope that a group of strangers from a distant world could somehow save her. He placed a hand gently on the edge of the bed, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of her skin. The contact was brief, but it felt significant. He wasn't just Captain Callahan, the leader of the Resolute. In that moment, he was something more. He was a human trying to help an alien, trying to help a species that had once looked down on humanity as insignificant. It was a strange feeling, knowing that they could make the difference between life and death for Zyra and her people. But it was also something powerful, something worth fighting for. The door to the medical bay slid open, and Dr. Grant reappeared, her face grim. She approached Callahan quickly, holding a vial in her hand, a small, shimmering blue liquid. "It's done," she said. "We've synthesized the serum. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do. We'll need to administer it immediately." Callahan nodded. "Let's do it." With practiced hands, Dr. Grant injected the serum into Zyra's IV line. The liquid disappeared into her veins, and for a moment nothing happened. There was no miraculous transformation, no sudden burst of energy, just silence. Callahan stood there, watching, waiting. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into what felt like an eternity. His mind raced, jumping from one thought to the next. What if the serum didn't work? What if it only made things worse? What if Zyra, what if all of them were doomed? But then a faint movement caught his eye. Zyra's hand twitched, just slightly. It was the smallest of movements, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope in Callahan's chest. "Is she?" Dr. Grant began, but she stopped mid-sentence as Zyra's breathing grew a little steadier. Her pulse, once weak and erratic, began to stabilize. "She's responding," Dr. Grant whispered, almost in disbelief. Callahan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A sign that the serum might actually work. That just maybe they had a chance. "Keep monitoring her," Callahan instructed, his voice firm. "We don't stop until she's stable." The medical team continued to work, adjusting machines, checking readings, and making adjustments. Callahan stayed by Zyra's side, his eyes never leaving her as he silently willed her to recover. He had seen many battles in his life. He had fought against hostile aliens, navigated dangerous space anomalies, and survived the most difficult missions. But none of it had ever felt like this. This was personal. This was about saving a species. This was about proving that humanity had something to offer to the galaxy, even when it seemed like no one else would. As the hours passed, Zyra's condition slowly improved. Her breathing deepened, and the pallor of her skin began to fade. Her body seemed to be accepting the serum, her immune system starting to fight back against the virus. It was a slow process, but it was progress. Callahan couldn't help but feel a surge of relief. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to pull this off. Dr. Grant finally turned to him, her expression softening. "It's working, Captain. She's not out of the woods yet, but we have time now. We have a chance." Callahan nodded, allowing himself a brief moment of hope. "Good. Then we'll keep going. We're not stopping until she's better." And as Zyra's breathing grew steadier, a new feeling began to settle in the room: hope. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it was finally possible to imagine a future where the Velker could rise again. The hours turned into days, and Zyra's condition slowly improved. The humans aboard the Resolute worked tirelessly, keeping a close watch over her, administering treatment and adjusting the doses of the serum. Dr. Miranda Grant remained at her side, her focus unwavering. Despite the exhaustion that showed in her tired eyes, she remained determined. There was something about this alien, about this leader, that made her believe they could succeed. For the first time since they had arrived at Velker, the mood on the ship began to shift. The crew, once anxious and uncertain, were now more hopeful. It was as if they had all shared in the weight of the mission, and now, with every sign of improvement in Zyra's condition, they began to feel the satisfaction of progress. But while the crew celebrated small victories, Dr. Grant knew they weren't out of danger yet. Zyra was still weak, her body fighting the virus every step of the way. The virus had been relentless, and the serum was only a temporary solution. The real test lay ahead. Could the humans truly find a way to cure the Velker and help them rebuild their civilization? Dr. Grant leaned over the console in the medical bay, staring at the data in front of her. She had been running scans on Zyra's DNA for hours, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that might reveal a deeper understanding of the virus and how it had ravaged the Velker. The more she studied, the more she realized that the disease was not simply a biological attack, it was engineered. Someone or something had designed it. The virus had a strange, almost intelligent quality to it. It adapted and evolved faster than most human viruses, attacking the Velker's immune system with brutal efficiency. But there was something else, something that felt out of place. Dr. Grant couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it was there, in the data, in the genetic code. She needed to find out more. She turned away from the console, her mind racing. She had spoken to Captain Callahan earlier about the situation, about the possibility that the virus was not just a natural occurrence but something far more sinister. Callahan had listened carefully, but she could tell that he wasn't entirely convinced. He was a man of action, not theory, and while he trusted her judgment, he was focused on the immediate task, saving Zyra and by extension, saving the Velker. But Dr. Grant couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at stake here than just the survival of a single species. If the virus had been engineered, then it was possible that the Velker weren't the only target. The realization sent a chill down her spine. There could be other civilizations out there, already suffering, and the source of the virus might be closer to home than they could have imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a soft cough from behind her. She turned quickly, finding Captain Callahan standing in the doorway of the medical bay. He had been keeping a low profile for the past few days, giving her and the medical team the space they needed to do their work. But now, as he stood there, his expression serious, "Doctor." Grant could tell something had changed. "How is she?" Callahan asked, his voice quiet but filled with concern. Dr. Grant paused for a moment, looking down at the readouts on the screen before her. Better, not out of danger yet, but better. The serum is working. Her immune system is starting to respond. The virus is still present, but it's weakening. It's only a matter of time before we can clear it completely. Callahan nodded, but there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. That's good, but it's not enough. We need to figure out why this virus is so effective, why it's able to adapt so quickly. If we don't understand how it works, we can't stop it from happening again, for the Velker or anyone else. Dr. Grant's face darkened. I've been thinking the same thing. This virus. It's not natural. It's been engineered. The patterns in the genetic code. They don't match anything we've seen before. This isn't just an accident of nature. This is something designed with intent. The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of her words hung in the air. Callahan's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Who would do something like that? Who would target the Velker with something so dangerous? I don't know yet, Dr. Grant replied, her voice tight. But I have a theory. The virus is evolving too quickly. It's as if it's being guided. It's possible that whoever created it is watching, learning, testing. Callahan's jaw clenched. So, you think someone could be behind this? Someone is using the Velker as a test subject. Dr. Grant nodded slowly. It's a possibility. And if that's the case, the Velker are not the only target. There may be other species out there, species that we don't even know about yet. If we don't figure this out, we could be looking at a galaxy-wide threat. Callahan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He hadn't considered the possibility that the virus might be part of a larger plan. The idea of a galactic-scale conspiracy was unsettling, but it also gave him a clear direction. They had to stop this virus. They had to understand who was behind it and why. If they didn't, Zyra's recovery would be meaningless. The Velker would be nothing more than the first casualties in a war they didn't even know was coming. I'll make sure the crew is ready for anything, Callahan said, his voice firm. If there's a larger threat out there, we need to be prepared to face it. Dr. Grant nodded. I'll keep working on the virus. I need to understand how it works before we can stop it. I'll also need access to more Velker medical records. There's something here that I'm missing, some key piece of the puzzle. Callahan gave her a brief nod, his face resolute. You'll have everything you need. Just keep me updated. We'll get to the bottom of this. With that, he turned and left the medical bay, leaving Dr. Grant alone with her thoughts. She stared at the data on the screen, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. The virus had been designed to be unstoppable, but they had to find a way to stop it. They had to find a way to protect the Velker and everyone else. Zyra, meanwhile, was resting peacefully, her breathing slow but steady. She was still weak, but she was alive. For the first time since the crisis began, Dr. Grant allowed herself to relax for just a moment. Zyra was improving, but that was just the beginning. There was still so much more to do. Dr. Grant returned her focus to the computer screen, searching for any clue, any scrap of information that might help. The virus had been designed with a clear purpose, but what was that purpose? Was it to eradicate entire species, or was there something more? Was it just the beginning of something even darker? As she worked, her thoughts turned back to the first time she had encountered Zyra. The Velker were a proud and ancient species, once the rulers of their sector. To see them brought so low, to watch as they struggled against the virus, was heartbreaking. But it also reminded Dr. Grant of something important. Humans had a role to play in this galaxy. The Velker might have once seen them as insignificant, but now, in their time of need, the humans had stepped in. They had saved a life. They had saved hope. And they would do it again, for the Velker, for the galaxy. They would stop the virus, and whatever dark force lay behind it. The next few days on the Resolute felt like an endless blur of activity. Dr. Grant, still tirelessly analyzing the virus and its effects on Zyra, worked day and night with her team. Captain Callahan, equally determined, kept the crew on high alert, making sure every department of the ship was prepared for what was to come. If they could cure the virus, if they could restore the Velker, they would be heroes. But it was becoming clear that what had started as a simple rescue mission had grown into something far more complex. They weren't just saving one alien species, they were standing in the way of a much larger threat. Dr. Grant had spent countless hours searching through the Velker medical archives, desperately trying to uncover any additional data that might help them understand the virus. The virus, which had initially seemed like a random natural disaster, now seemed like something far more intentional, even dangerous. It was as though someone had designed it to adapt, to outsmart its hosts and the medicines they used against it. She leaned over the console in the medical bay, her tired eyes scanning the data. Her hand hovered over the keys, unwilling to make the final decision. Something was off. She could feel it. There was more to this virus than they had yet uncovered. She had suspected it before, but now, after hours of research and analyzing genetic markers, it was becoming increasingly clear. Whoever had engineered this virus had done so with a very specific purpose in mind. Doctor Grant, you need to take a break, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Rail, the communications officer, his voice filled with concern. I'm fine, Dr. Grant replied distractedly, her gaze still fixed on the screen. Just a few more minutes. You've been at it for hours, Rail said, stepping into the medical bay with a gentle smile. Captain Callahan asked if you join him in the briefing room. He needs your analysis on the virus. Dr. Grant sighed, rubbing her temples. She was exhausted. She hadn't slept properly in days, but she couldn't stop now. She couldn't rest until she knew what they were dealing with. Tell Callahan I'll be there in a minute, she said, finally closing the terminal with a resigned click. She knew the crew needed her focus, but she was beginning to fear that the more she learned, the less she understood. As she left the medical bay, the ship's halls felt emptier than usual. There was an almost tangible tension in the air. It had only been a few days since they had saved Zyra, but already, the crew knew that they had only begun to scratch the surface of what was really going on. What had started as a routine mission to assist an alien species was quickly turning into a nightmare. The unknown lay ahead, and the crew of the Resolute was walking a tightrope without a safety net. When Dr. Grant entered the briefing room, Captain Callahan was already waiting. He stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, a furrow on his brow. His gaze met hers, and for a moment there was silence. Both of them knew how much was riding on what happened next. "Doc," Callahan greeted, his voice calm but filled with the urgency of their situation. "We've been talking. We need your final word." "What's the best course of action?" Dr. Grant took a seat, letting out a long breath. She glanced at the data pad in front of her, her fingers tapping lightly against the table as she gathered her thoughts. "The serum we administered to Zyra worked," she began, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "Her condition has stabilized. We've stopped the virus from spreading, but it hasn't been completely eradicated. There's still a trace of it in her system, and if we don't get to the root of it soon, it'll return. Worse, it may spread to other species." Callahan leaned forward, his expression sharp. "You're saying this virus could go galactic?" Dr. Grant nodded. "Exactly. And I'm not just talking about the Velker. The genetic markers we found in the virus are consistent with engineered bioweapons. Whoever designed this thing knew exactly what they were doing. They tailored it to infect the Velker, yes, but it can easily adapt to other species, humans included." The room grew silent as the weight of her words settled in. The implications were clear. This wasn't just a biological accident. This was something much more dangerous. "So who's behind this?" Callahan asked, his voice low. "Who benefits from a galaxy-wide plague?" "That's what I need to figure out," Dr. Grant replied. "I've been trying to trace the virus's origins through the Velker archives, but it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. The Velker's medical records are old and incomplete, but if I can get access to more data, I might be able to trace this back to its source." Callahan nodded slowly, his mind racing. "We'll get you everything you need, but we don't have much time. Zyra's getting weaker again, and I'm worried that if we don't do something soon, she won't survive the next round." "I know," Dr. Grant said, her voice strained. "That's why I need to keep working. I'll need access to the rest of the Velker's medical databases and any data you can pull from the ship systems. I need to compare their information with ours. Only then can we know what we're really dealing with." Callahan exhaled, a sharp sound. "All right. I'll give the order, but we have to make it quick. We're running out of time." Just as Dr. Grant was about to respond, the ship's AI, Elysium, interrupted the conversation with a soft chime. A message had arrived, an encrypted transmission from an unknown source. The message was brief and to the point. "We know what you're doing. Stop now or you'll be the next targets." Dr. Grant's blood ran cold as she read the message aloud. "They know we're onto them." Callahan's jaw clenched and his hands balled into fists. "It's not a warning. It's a threat." "I don't think they're bluffing," Dr. Grant said, her voice tight with the weight of the situation. "Whoever is behind this virus, they're monitoring us, and they'll stop at nothing to protect their secret." Callahan turned to face the crew on the other side of the room. His voice was firm, decisive. "We need to move fast. We'll find out who's behind this and we'll stop them before they can do any more damage. No more threats, no more delays." He turned back to Dr. Grant. "Get that data, we'll back you up, but we need answers and we need them now." With the weight of the universe seemingly on their shoulders, the crew of the Resolute prepared for the next phase of their mission. The stakes had never been higher. The survival of the Velker, and possibly the galaxy itself, depended on the answers they could uncover in the next few days. But one thing was certain: the clock was ticking, and they were running out of time. In the medical bay, Zyra continued to rest, unaware of the looming threat that was closing in. Her condition was still fragile, and the virus was far from defeated. The humans had done everything they could, but it was clear that the battle was not yet over. And now, with a dangerous enemy in pursuit, they had to act quickly, before it was too late. The moment Captain Callahan received the encrypted threat, the atmosphere aboard the Resolute shifted once again. It was no longer just a mission of mercy. It had become a race against time, not just to save the Velker but to uncover a hidden enemy that threatened the entire galaxy. The crew knew the stakes. They had already risked so much, but now they understood that their actions could have consequences far beyond the Velker system. Callahan had always been a man of action. He knew that sitting idle wasn't an option, especially not when the survival of an entire species, perhaps even the future of the galaxy, was at risk. But the knowledge that an unseen enemy was watching them, tracking their every move, made it all the more urgent. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as he watched Dr. Grant and the rest of the medical team continue their efforts to stabilize Zyra. He had spent so many years commanding ships, fighting battles, and making decisions that affected the lives of those under his command. But this felt different. This wasn't about defending human interests. This was about the survival of another civilization. And it was a civilization that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant, a race of little consequence. But now, it was humanity that stood between the Velker and annihilation. Dr. Grant had spent the last few hours deep in the ship's research vaults, sifting through every scrap of data they could access. The more she learned, the more certain she became. The virus was not a random occurrence. It was a deliberate weapon, designed to wipe out species that stood in the way of whoever had created it. And whoever was behind it had already begun testing it on other civilizations. The Velker were just the first. As Dr. Grant worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. She had uncovered countless genetic markers, patterns in the virus's design, but they didn't tell her who the enemy was or why they had chosen the Velker. It was clear that the weapon wasn't just a biological attack, it was strategic. Whoever had created it knew how to manipulate the virus, how to control its evolution. They had designed it to be unstoppable, to adapt to the genetic makeup of every species it encountered. But there was still hope. As long as they could find the source, as long as they could stop the virus from spreading further, they might be able to put an end to this threat before it spiraled out of control. Finally, after what seemed like days of searching, Dr. Grant found the missing piece. Buried deep within the Velker archives was a mention of a hidden research facility, one that the Velker had shut down years ago due to a catastrophic failure. It had been the site of the original bioweapons tests. The virus that had nearly wiped out the Velker had been developed there. And the facility, as it turned out, wasn't just a research lab, it was the birthplace of the weapon. With this new information in hand, Callahan wasted no time in organizing a plan to infiltrate the facility. He knew that they couldn't afford to wait any longer. If they didn't act quickly, the virus could spread to other planets, to other species. And with the mysterious enemy watching their every move, they couldn't risk leaving anything to chance. The crew of the Resolute prepared for the mission. They would need to move quickly and quietly, without alerting the enemy to their presence. The plan was simple: find the facility, destroy the remaining samples of the virus, and gather any intelligence they could on the organization behind the weapon. If they succeeded, they would stop the virus from spreading, and the Velker might have a chance to recover. As they neared the location of the hidden facility, the tension aboard the ship reached its peak. Every member of the crew knew how dangerous this mission was. They were going into unknown territory, where the enemy might be lying in wait. But they had no other choice. They couldn't allow the virus to spread, and they couldn't let the enemy continue their twisted experiments. The small strike team that Callahan assembled consisted of the best and brightest aboard the Resolute. Dr. Grant was, of course, part of the team, but Callahan knew that the success of the mission would depend on everyone working together. The facility was well hidden, protected by layers of security, both physical and digital. But the Resolute's crew was resourceful, and Callahan trusted them to get the job done. As the team approached the facility, the dark, cold surface of the planet below them came into view. It was a barren world, desolate and devoid of life. The facility was nestled deep within the planet's mountains, a place that had been forgotten by the Velker for decades. The enemy must have chosen it for its isolation, thinking no one would ever stumble upon it. "Stay sharp," Callahan ordered as they descended into the facility's atmosphere. "We don't know what we're walking into." The team made their way to the entrance, moving quietly through the jagged landscape. The facility loomed ahead of them, a hulking structure built into the side of the mountain. It was surrounded by tall, barbed fences, but the team had already devised a plan to bypass the security systems. They had to act fast, time was running out, and every second counted. Inside the facility, the air was thick with tension. The walls were covered in strange symbols and markings, some of which the crew had never seen before. It was clear that this place had been abandoned for a long time, but the data they had recovered indicated that the virus samples were still contained somewhere inside. Dr. Grant led the way, her eyes scanning the walls as she searched for any signs of where the virus might be stored. They moved quickly, avoiding the few automated security systems that remained operational. Callahan kept a hand on his sidearm, always alert to any movement, any sound. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they descended into the lower levels of the facility, the temperature dropped and the air grew heavier. The hallways were eerily silent, the faint hum of the old machinery the only sound breaking the stillness. But then a noise echoed through the corridors, a faint, distant click. Callahan's heart raced. He motioned for the team to stop, his hand raised in a silent command. They waited, listening. The noise came again, this time closer. Something was moving. "We've been made," Callahan said, his voice low and urgent. "Move out. Now." The team sprang into action, rushing down the narrow hallway. They reached a door at the end, a reinforced security hatch. Dr. Grant quickly accessed the terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. Within seconds, the door slid open. Inside, the room was filled with rows of glass containers, each one holding a sample of the virus. The deadly weapon was contained, but it was clear that the facility had been well prepared. The samples were labeled in a language no one on the team could understand, but they didn't have time to decode it. Their mission was simple: destroy the virus and get out. Doctor. Grant's hand hovered over the control panel, her mind racing. "I need to override the containment systems. We'll need to destroy the samples manually." As she worked, the sound of footsteps grew louder. They weren't alone. Callahan motioned for the team to take positions. The enemy had arrived. "Get ready," he said. "We're not leaving without finishing the job." The door at the far end of the room burst open, and several armed figures stepped inside. They wore dark, featureless suits, their faces obscured by helmets. They moved with precision, their weapons trained on the team. "Step away from the console," one of the figures ordered, his voice distorted by the helmet's voice modulator. "This is your last chance." Callahan didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired. The shot rang out, hitting the first of the enemies in the chest. The figure dropped, but more emerged from the shadows. It was a firefight, fast and furious. The team fought back, using the room's cover to their advantage. Dr. Grant managed to complete the override, sending a signal to the ship to trigger the virus's destruction. Within seconds, the samples began to disintegrate, turning to ash. But the enemy wasn't done. They kept coming, relentless in their pursuit. "We're out of time," Callahan shouted. "We need to move now." The team fought their way through the facility, each step bringing them closer to the exit. The enemy was everywhere, but they pushed forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the surface. With the virus destroyed, the team made their way back to the Resolute. As they ascended into space, Callahan looked down at the barren planet below. The enemy had been stopped, but there was no telling what other threats lay out there in the galaxy. What mattered now was that they had done their part. They had saved the Velker. They had stopped a weapon that could have torn the galaxy apart. Back aboard the Resolute, Zyra stirred in her medical bed, her breathing steady, her color returning. She was alive. The Velker had been given a second chance, and humanity had proved once again that, no matter the odds, they would always rise to the challenge.